Welcome back into the MizzouToday Show on 3 and Rivals. I'm your host, Kenny Van Doren, joined, of course, by senior editor of Mizzou Today, Kyle McAreavy. Kyle, it's game week. Recording here on Wednesday. Game is on Thursday. Before we get into the details and maybe what to look for, we have to start with the quarterback battle. I guess that's what most people are going to be looking for. Eli Drinkwitz laid out his plan. Pete Thamel was the first to report it. Then he went and talked about it the last 2 days. What can you kind of tell us about what this quarterback plan looks like, and maybe some surprises for you before I give you my take?
Yeah, I would say the plan in general is Beau Pribula will take the first half, Sam Horn will take the second half. That's, I think, kind of what was expected once Drinkwitz made clear that both were going to play this week. It's the same setup as in 2023 when Sam Horn was going against Brady Cook. It's a little surprising to me just because I read this competition as a little more even than that 2023 competition. And I don't think this is necessarily an even setup in a game like this. When you're going against a team like Central Arkansas, the assumption should be that you're going to be up, 28 points at halftime. So by the time Sam comes in the second half, it's a huge lead. And, Drinkwitz has said a couple of times that that's not going to affect the play calling, but of course it is. You're not going out there trying to win by 60 against Central Arkansas. If you're up by 28 or 35, you're not throwing deep balls to Marquise Johnson just to see if they work. You're going to run the ball a lot. You're going to drain clock. And for a significant portion, Sam's going to be playing with the twos. And if it's close enough for him to be playing with the ones the whole time, that's an entirely different problem. But it is kind of what was expected coming in once it was known that the two of them would both be playing.
I agree with Drinkwitz saying that there is no real easy way to do this. He had to make the decision. He went with the same, the same, I guess, plan and system that he had in 2023 that you're talking about. Of course, it's going to be a little bit different. I think that when you get into that second half, you're still not going to take the foot off the gas. But also, I think at some point you're going to have to. This is a game that you paid this team to come here. Of course, it's a cupcake. It's not a slouch really on an FCS opponent, but saying that you don't want to go full speed probably near that second half. You don't want some of those guys that will be playing primarily most of the season in those ones and twos out on the field for that entire second half. Probably want to take some of those guys out near the fourth quarter. I was not in the camp of saying that maybe you needed these quarterbacks to switch every series. I do agree with Drinkwitz that probably takes away from momentum and getting these guys up to speed and get them into a rhythm throughout that game. So it's really a tough test. But I did like the idea of you split these guys by quarters. And I think, maybe if you roll into the second quarter, you still let Beau Pribula finish out that drive. If Sam, I guess it wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't roll into the halftime, but it's one of those things where, if they rolled into another quarter, you just let the guy finish out the drive, then you pass the keys off. So I understand, it is a very tough decision. But it does feel like it's probably just the same thing as 2023. And Drinkwitz said someone had to trot out there first. They chose Beau. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of people are probably set on Beau Pribula being the quarterback. Do I have that right, Kyle?
Yeah, I think so. And, I agree that there's no easy way to do this. I think we're on kind of the same page, switching off drives or series. Even if you say, you get 2 or 3 series in a row, momentum and getting into the flow of the game is important. I think the reason maybe you don't do quarters is because you want Beau to get a look as a 2-minute offense type of situation, at the end of or going into halftime. You don't really get that if you've got Sam in the second and the fourth. And either way, that still sets Sam up for the fourth quarter. I mean, one of these guys was going to have to be in the situation of playing with the twos, right? I mean, you're not going to leave the ones out there for the whole game. I was thinking back on this and, look at the game Khalil Jacobs got hurt in last year. That was at UMass. Injuries are too relevant in football. You can't keep the ones in there the whole game just to see what the quarterbacks have. And yeah, there's no way to get an even look here except splitting series probably. And splitting series takes away from that momentum and the rhythm of the game in a way that doesn't give you all that clear of a look either.
moving off the quarterback competition and looking more at this offense now, got the first unofficial depth chart of the season for week 1 against Central Arkansas. Talked about the quarterbacks, Beau Pribula and Sam Horn listed with that OR designation. Any surprises to you, looking at this offense? I'll run through some of the other offensive skill players. Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts split between an OR for running back 1. I think that's more of a designation of the different rotations that they'll use at running back, with Jamal being a lot of pass protection and Ahmad Hardy really being that bell cow for the run game. Wide receivers, the Z outside, Joshua Manning, H slot will be Kevin Coleman, and then the X, outside receiver, Marquise Johnson. And of course, at the tight end, you have Brett Norfleet and Jordan Harris designated with the OR at starting tight ends. And that's also just a kind of a complement each other on who's going to be blocking and who's going to be pass catching. Any surprises there for you?
Not really. I think all of that kind of lined up the way that was expected going in. I know it got the Ahmad Hardy or Jamal Roberts got pointed out by a few people. I think you've got the right of it there, where it's just, Jamal's going to be part of the rotation. He's almost certainly the consistent third down back like he was last year. He's superb in pass protection, and the staff loves that. And, this is a game where you're not going to run Ahmad Hardy 20 times. Because like we were just talking about with injuries, like there's no reason to give him a massive workload this week. You've got a pretty important game next week that you want him as healthy as possible for. So, maybe you have him take the ball 10 times and then get out and, get him some game experience so that he rolls into the season, but nothing too much. Receiver wise, basically, those starting 3 were kind of pretty well known. I think the backup situation worked out basically as expected too. And then tight ends, the one that surprised me was Jude James kind of jumping up into the 3rd spot. He had a really nice camp. I know he got some praise from coaches and looked pretty good during the scrimmage that media got to watch. So that's good to see. I was never super high on the Vince Brown ad through the portal coming from Colorado State. So kind of those two as the backup rotation was good to see. I'm glad, good to see Jude James actually might get a real look, a real opportunity this year.
Mm-hmm. And with, that tight end spot too, Vince Brown, I think it's notable that, he was the Tyler Stevens replacement. You bring in a guy who has experience, has played it, and, at the JUCO ranks, he got up to the Mountain West, and he's played against some Power 4 schools just in those competitions. But, he's really just kind of replacing you with experience depth. I was a little bit surprised not to see Gavin Hoffman crack that list. I'm sure we'll see him a good amount on special teams in a blocking role or running downfield at some point. Looking at the offensive line, though, of course, we already established, who the starters are from left to right, tackle, guard, center, guard, tackle, Caden Green, Dominic Gadice, Connor Tollison, Curtis Piegler, and Keegan Tross. We've already talked about that. But in that 2 deep, you have Javen Richardson, Jalen Early, Tristan Wilson, Logan Reichert, who's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks with a lower body injury, and then Johnny Williams. No surprises there for me. I think just in that 2 deep, you have some guys that probably step up in the next, later into the year, probably in camp and be in that vying for a spot on the 2 deep later in the year. But I think that probably makes the most sense, right, Kyle?
Yeah, I think the way it worked out, again, pretty expected. Drinkwitz has talked before about how Tristan Wilson is probably the actual backup at all 3 interior spots. Which surprises me a little bit just because you mentioned Jalen Early is listed as the backup left guard. I expected him to, maybe even fight for a starter role when he transferred over from Florida State. And then, as you mentioned, Logan Reichert not going to be listed moving forward as he's dealing with a lower body injury. Again, just pretty terrible news for the kid who I know a lot of fans expected a lot from early on in his career, and he's once again going to miss a significant portion of the season and lose out on that development time.
Exactly. I mean, everyone knows the story of, how they recruited him, and it was one of the shortest recruitment ceremonies ever. It was between Mizzou and Oregon, and he got right to the point when he chose Mizzou. I mean, that was back when I was still in college in 2022, and they had the big dump truck, and I think it was a dump truck that they brought in, and, Drinkwitz really did a big part in keeping him home rather than let him go somewhere else. We'll switch to the defensive side of the ball. Defensive ends. I'll just run through the starters. Zion Young, defensive end at the jack or joker position. You have Damon Wilson. Defensive tackles, Chris McClellan, Marquise Gracial, split at those spots. And Sterling Webb has an OR designation right behind Gracial as a starter. Weak side linebacker, Tristan Newson. Middle linebacker, Josiah Trotter. The star hybrid safety of Dalen Carnell. And the rover strong safety of Jalen Catalon. Free safety, Marvin Burks. And starting cornerbacks, Drayden Norwood. And then an OR designation between Toriano Pride Jr. and Stephen Hall. Any big surprises there for you, Kyle?
As a whole, I guess you can go all the way back to the start there. Nate Johnson is listed with an OR alongside Langdon Kitchen as the backup defensive end. My read on the situation was Nate Johnson had kind of separated himself into the top four alongside Darius Smith, Damon Wilson, and Zion Young, and that DN's coach Brian Early told me that they want a 4-man rotation and they expect to have 4 starting quality guys. And my read had been that Nate Johnson was one of those 4 specifically. So to have him listed with an OR with Langdon Kitchen there is pretty interesting to me. It's probably a good sign overall that Kitchen is doing a bit better than maybe what I had gotten out of camp. Marquise Gracial listed as an OR with Sterling Webb. I know he's been a big riser throughout camp, one of the guys who has impressed the most, especially with the staff and with his teammates. So for him to work his way all the way into a starting role after he was, I think, fourth on the depth chart last year, great for him. He and Sterling Webb at least have, very different bodies and serve kind of different roles. So I expect that OR designation is more just what does the team think it needs on that specific play. And, Gracial's listed at 32 pounds heavier. He's just a much bigger dude. So much more of a run stuffer, big body up the middle than Sterling Webb is. So that one's probably just situational dependent. And then no big surprises otherwise. Toriano Pride and Stephen Hall being mixed in. I think it's been pretty well known the last couple of weeks of camp that the main 3 in the cornerback room was going to be Drayden Norwood, Toriano Pride, and Stephen Hall, with Nick DeLoach kind of taking a step back after he was thrown into maybe a little bit bigger of a role last year than he was necessarily ready for. I think, his development has come along nicely, but when you bring in a guy like Stephen Hall, who's that experienced, and you have these 3 senior corners who have combined, average 5 or 6 years of college football experience because of how long Hall's been around, you got to go with the experienced group there.
Yeah, that was the one thing that kind of popped up in my mind because they really welcomed a lot of competition between Nick DeLoach and Toriano Pride last year. And I even put Toriano Pride in my group of guys you probably want to expect a leap forward for most improved this year, just because the grading wise in the middle of the season by PFF just wasn't great for Pride. And coming over from Clemson, coming home, as they say, for an East St. Louis product, there's a high expectations, and that's why he's going to probably play with a chip on his shoulder this year. That safety room looks deep. I mean, the two deep. You have Trajan Greco behind at the free safety, Santana Banner, another transfer behind Jalen Catalon at the rover, Mose Phillips and Caleb Flagg at the star. I mean, there's just a lot of depth there at the safety position, and there's more guys probably on the way too that can probably fill those roles in the next couple of years. And just one question just for you. I mean, were you a little bit surprised not to see Javion Hilson just listed on the depth chart in some capacity?
I guess when you bring it up, maybe you've got your spots that have 3 guys listed. I don't think he's in an OR situation that would be reasonable at either the end or the jack position. He'll get his time. I think the staff kind of learned from the Williams Nwaneri experiment last year that there's no real reason to conserve a kid's red shirt at this point, with how the portal works. So if they see Hilson as ready to contribute and, being a valuable add on the field, he's going to be on the field. And, it sounded from Brian Early like he's probably a situational pass rusher where they can, really, really dive in, and they know it's going to be be a pass that's going to take him a second to develop, then they can bring a guy like Hilson on the field, get a couple of pass rushers out there, and really focus in on that.
Before we move on to our last depth chart look with the special teams, we had a quick ad read from our sponsors over at Rowback. There's only one way to describe Rowback: best fit, best feel. For those who aren't familiar with Rowback, they're completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. We didn't plan this today, Kyle, but you and I are both wearing Rowback again. I think we're just doing it because they are our sponsors, but we found out we bought the exact same stuff, not the same colors, but we both bought the hoodie, the quarter zip, and the polo. I mean, were we playing that? No, I don't think so. But Rowback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, and it's our favorite, with novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs for some of your favorite schools. It includes Missouri. We'll get to that promo code here in a second. It's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else on the market is pairing this level of custom design with this quality of activewear. Rowback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They're both comfortable, have an elastic waistband, and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short look, but the comfort for a day on the move. Rowback also has been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and becoming the go-to brand for college athletics across the country. Use the code MIZ20 on rowback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers through the end of this week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with code MIZ20. Kyle, getting back into just to look at the depth charts, just for you, with special teams, I know it's a little bit more of my corner, and you wrote about that actually in your story as well. I don't really think there's any surprises. Even just on the depth chart, there were some other guys that have joined the team as a walk-on, and you saw those officially hit the roster this week. So there are going to be 3 kickers this year. It looked like they were only going to have 2 at every spot among the specialists, but Blake Craig and Robert Meyer, 1 and 2 at kicker. And kickoff, punting, of course, Connor Wesselman, the Stanford transfer at the 1, and then Grossmont Community College from the JUCO ranks, John Butcher, another transfer at the 2 spot. Holding wise, Connor Wesselman, who I spoke about with you, is prized as a holder, and what he did last year for the Cardinal. He'll be number 1. And then Beau Pribula, maybe a little bit of surprise as the backup one. I know Brady Cook handled some of those at some points in his career. Brett LeBlanc, number 1 long snapper, with freshman Henry Crosby right behind him. This will be the first year for Brett LeBlanc, handling all of the kicks and punts after splitting some time with Trey Flint the last 2 seasons. Punt returner Kevin Coleman, number 2 is Daniel Blood and Demarion Folks. I've mentioned it before multiple times about how much the high school ranks Demarion Folks was a threat with that speed at the punt returning position. Kickoff returners would be Tavoris Jones or Jamal Roberts, and Marvin Burks or Demarion Folks. So, or designation between those 4, just at the 2 different kickoff return spots. Any surprises here for you?
The biggest surprise for me in kickoff return is no Marquise Johnson. I think we got a chance to talk to Eric Link back in spring ball, and it was kind of discussed about him. And he said, I'd be an idiot not to have Marquise Johnson back there. He's just an electric returner, his speed plays. But honestly, with the role he's going to take on the offense, I get it. You don't want to risk, a guy who's going to be a pretty important pass catcher for you out on kick returns. I do like the kick return mix a lot. I think Tavoris Jones has the speed and athleticism to play at this level, and just has kept getting passed up in the running back room. I think part of that is pass protection. But putting him out there on returns is a great way to kind of let that athleticism play. Jamal Roberts surprised me a little bit there, just because he's not the type of runner that I associate with returns, but that doesn't mean he's a bad choice. Marvin Burks surprised me a little bit there, but that's more, I think, because I just don't often think about safeties as return options. And he's a starter, which, kind of goes along with that Marquise Johnson argument. But like you talked about, Demarion Folks, seeing him in camp, that speed's going to play. And this is, I think, a great way for him to get on the field consistently in the return game. I am excited to see him get out there and return some kicks.
Get into score predictions now for the Central Arkansas contest. I'll give mine real quick, and I'll let you go deeper into yours. But I did 51-0. I thought in my mind that if this was before the quarterback plan was set and it was public, But in my mind, I thought if they're switching every 2 series or they're switching every quarter, no matter what, these guys don't want the punter to see the field. They do not want Connor Wesselman. They probably like him, but they don't want him to see the field. This is your opportunity to fight for that quarterback spot. And you don't want to leave points on the board. I think that's one of the biggest things that I was thinking there. And you're playing an FCS opponent. It's an FCS opponent with, some former Division I players, even former Mizzou players, and two secondary guys coming in. One of them actually not too long ago when I was still or both of them when I was still in school. So I think Wes Hewitt, I believe, and then or Les Hewitt. And I forgot the other one's name. I'll find it here in a second. But those are just some decent players that are from those ranks that are now at FCS school. So I was thinking 51-0. Someone on our board even pointed out maybe look more because it is that quarterback battle. The South Dakota game in 2023, 35-10, maybe something more in that range. So if I walked it back, I would say 42-3. I just don't think the defense should really give up any points in this game.
I think that's fair. I mean, in a game like this, you're going to put up a lot of points. You're not going to give up too many. I predicted 38-7. I think I expect there to be a drive or two that the offense just kind of stalls. Not through getting stopped, I guess, but just kind of something just doesn't click, right? And then that ends up in a punt or a field goal, and then you end up with 5 touchdowns and a field goal. I think the run game is probably going to look pretty good. And, maybe it's trying to force the passing game a little bit to really get a read on the quarterbacks and a time or two that ends up in a kind of a stalled drive. So we'll see. I went with 7 for the defense just because I expect that at some point it's going to be all 2s and 3s out there. I know last year there was a lot of pride taken in back-to-back shutouts to start the season. So maybe, if Central Arkansas is getting in close, you throw the ones back out there and you say, just don't let them score. But I expect that it'll come pretty late, and it just in a situation like, we're up 35 or 38 points. There's no reason to even really try to stop this. Let's just let it happen and get the ball back.
For sure. And that kind of plays into my part for our last little segment here before we close it out. It's like one big thing that you're looking for. And I think it's, scoring on the defensive side of the ball. This team has really leaned into the havoc that they like to cause. And that dates even back to when Blake Baker was the defensive coordinator, is that they want to force turnovers. They want to make the offense uncomfortable. And something I pointed out to you on the Rule, the other podcast that I do on Mizzou Athletics, is that I think a guy like maybe Santana Banner has a big game in this one. If he sees a little bit more action, especially into the second half, does he get an interception? Does he have a big forced fumble? Because one big thing that Drinkwitz pointed out is that he just hits people so hard in practice. They love what they're seeing from him. Probably just need him to ease it back at times. Before we get to yours, I will point out is Marcus Scott, former Missouri defensive back, and LJ Hewitt, both of them playing on that 2022 Mizzou football team. I have a fun, quick story just on Marcus Scott as well. I ran into him at the Wendy's on 9th Street in Columbia at like 2 a.m. one time. He was just there with some buddies, and I was there just finishing off the night. I went up to him. I just went up to him and I said, I know who you are. And he thought that was pretty cool. So that was my last thing. But what's one big thing you're looking for besides the quarterback battle?
I would say the biggest thing I'm looking for is just domination in the trenches. That's kind of on both sides of the ball. That's really the spot where talent differential sticks out in games like this against an FCS opponent or a low-level FBS opponent. Is, Mizzou's offensive line should be bigger and stronger than everybody on the defensive line, and Mizzou's defensive line should be stronger and faster than everybody that they're going up against. I mean, it should be, I have some extra predictions coming out tomorrow. I'm going to try to start doing some game day predictions and then evaluate how I do after the game. I'm not going to give them away here, but it has a lot to do with domination in the trenches and kind of the results of that, which part of that is creating turnovers. I looked up for that prediction story. The Tigers only had 7 interceptions last year. That's not enough. So they can kind of get off to a good start here with maybe a couple of them. And then, that can be caused by the defensive line really wreaking havoc in the backfield, like you were talking about.
Mizzou, Central Arkansas, 6:30 p.m. Thursday, fourth straight year opening the season on a Thursday before Memorial Day, of course, at Faurot Field Memorial Stadium. You can watch it on SEC Network or ESPN Plus if you have that. Probably going to be a lot of games on SEC Network, but week 2, you got Kansas on ESPN2. So, I mean, that's going to be more of a primetime game, primetime crew coming in for that game. Kyle, where can the people find you on Twitter for your updates for this game?
Yeah, so on Twitter, I'm Kyle_McAreavy, spelled the way it is at the bottom of the screen here, or at MizzouToday. All of our work is published there. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting the season going and, actually writing about some games again.
Kyle will have all your coverage for that game Thursday and into the weekend with any updates or recaps that he has, PFF grades, everything you can think of. If he doesn't post it, get on the board, let him know what you want to hear, what you want to hear him say, what he saw, he didn't say, anything like that. Just let him know. We'll see you guys after that one to preview Kansas next week.